The Right Honourable Peter Robertson to move amendment number 2. Mr Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I move the amendment standing in my name and that of my party colleagues, and clearly I speak in the capacity as the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, as opposed to that as of First Minister. I believe that the debate today should be welcomed as a good opportunity to take stock of where we are in terms of the process and what the next steps might be. Nonetheless, I have to say that I don't welcome the divisive nature of the motion itself. It sets up a party political position, and indeed, with respect to the other political parties, each of their motions is designed to set out their party political position. The motion that is in my name and that of my colleagues recognises that there is a tomorrow, that we have to resolve the outstanding issues. None of us in this chamber could be satisfied with the issues as they stand at the present time. The status quo simply is not acceptable. I am not satisfied that the sovereign flag of my nation is treated with disrespect in various parts of the province. I want those kind of issues resolved. I am not satisfied with the Parades Commission and the role and function that it carries out. Those issues have to be resolved. And I'm not satisfied that we have some rewriting of the past. And I want to ensure that the story of the past is told, but it's told in a fair and balanced way. And I'm not convinced that any of those 3 areas are dealt with properly under the status quo, and therefore we need change. But I have to say that it has always been my position that no deal is better than a bad deal. And I don't believe that taken as a package, that this was a good deal that was going to resolve the issues at stake and help to resolve parading, the flags problem, and indeed the issues surrounding the past. I start from that process that it is only worthwhile if it is going to improve the situation, not if it's going to make it worse. And I'll come to some of the issues themselves in a moment or two, but I think it's right to express our thanks and appreciation to Dr Haass, Professor O'Sullivan and their team for the very hard work that they did over a 6-month period. We recognise that these are intractable issues. If they had been easier, we would have solved them when we were dealing with the CSI issue. If they had been easier, we would have been able to resolve them left to our own devices. But I think very useful work has been done. Now, I think there's a misunderstanding on the part of the party opposite, and indeed some others in this chamber, and perhaps even with Dr Haass, in terms of what was required. Because we left down very clear instructions as to what was required. We put it in paper, both to the committee members in the panel and indeed to Dr O'Sullivan and to Dr Haass when we gave them their letter of appointment. And here are the terms of reference that were given. And it indicated that the panel will be invited to bring forward a set of recommendations by the end of 2013. I could go into the rest of it, but it's the usual stuff about what they were to bring in recommendations in relation to. So it was the task of the panel to bring forward the recommendations. The panel did not do that. The panel brought forward no recommendations whatsoever, whether they were agreed unanimously by the 5 parties that were there, or indeed if they were agreed by a sufficient consensus of those who were around the table. That job is still to be completed. What we have is Dr Haass's view of what might be a fair and balanced proposition. I don't agree that it is balanced, but I do agree that within the proposals that he brings forward, there are many issues which I believe are satisfactory in terms of taking the matter forward. I think I've been referred to indicating that the broad structure that's outlined by Dr Haass is one that could house the structures that would take us forward, but there still is a requirement to get the detail right. And you can have the most positive of proposals poisoned by detail that does not make the proposition work in the way that would be best and most fitting. So the parties still have not fulfilled the obligation that was placed on them to bring forward their proposals to the Deputy First Minister and myself. Now, You can hide behind Richard Haass and say, well, we like what he's done and therefore that's the end of the story. But it's not. You weren't there to get an agreement with Dr. Haass. You were there to get an agreement amongst the 5 parties. Dr. Haass won't be about here when there's problems with parades or flags or the past. We will. It's us that you have to get an agreement with. It's the parties around this chamber that need to be satisfied with the way forward. And an agreement that simply brings the SDLP and Sinn Féin together isn't going to resolve our problems, because you need to bring unionism along with you. And I have to say, having listened to Tom Elliott's remarks, I don't think there's anything that he said that I could disagree with. I entirely accept his view that in terms of parades, there are 2 big issues still sitting there that have not been resolved. I can see the benefit of a more transparent system that's outlined in the Haass document, but it is destroyed by 2 issues: criteria and code of conduct. And incidentally, 2 issues which we had resolved satisfactorily in 2010 in terms of code of conduct and the criteria. But in criteria, the issue of cost has been added, which, as has been indicated, incentivises protesters and those who would want to cause disruption to cause as much disruption as possible in order to make a cost attached to any parade, so that the police will put forward what their bill might be to police that parade, and that will be a factor, a criteria that is taken into account in whether you would allow a parade to go forward or not. Now, quite frankly, if you incentivise those who want to stop a parade, you are not resolving the parade's issue. So I think we really do need to find out whether people really believe that there is a cost attached to people exercising their rights of being able to assemble and to parade. The second issue of the code of conduct, there is already a code of conduct, and that code of conduct applies to those parades which are under a determination. The new code of conduct in the Haass proposals applies to every parade and to the supporters of parades. So we now have a situation where, under the Haass proposals, even those parades that have gone off peacefully, and over again I've heard members from all sides of this chamber indicate that we're only dealing with a small number of difficult parades. So why put under the criminal law the 95 or more % of parades and their supporters where there is no problem whatsoever? It's just unnecessary to do that, and I don't think that it should be done. There are issues clearly in terms of the past in relation to the issues that Mr Elliott raised. I raised one further one, in that there is a suggestion that a body be set up that would have 1 representative from each of the 5 executive parties. Well, if anybody thinks I'm going to treat the electorate who vote for the Democratic Unionist Party in that way, then they are mistaken. There is no way that it would be acceptable to have a party with 8 members in this Assembly given the same representation as a party with 38 members in this Assembly. But that is one, and there are other issues to be resolved as well. So what do we do by way of moving forward? I think the leaders' meeting tomorrow is important. I agree to some extent with the remarks made by Jerry Kelly that there are difficulties, because you almost look back to the CSI period. You can see the length of time that that took to end up with the transforming, or the Together Building a United Community document. So there needs to be some impetus in terms of the work of a working group if it is to continue doing this work. But the one thing that we need to do, first of all, is for each of the parties to be honest and to say which elements of the Haass proposals they agree with, which ones that they could see agreeing if they got some change to them, and which ones are excluded altogether. And I think we need to have that exercise amongst the party. I counted that there's over 340 separate elements to the Haass proposals. So I think we do need to work out whether there are elements that all 5 parties are in agreement with, and if they are sufficient to be able to allow us to move forward in those issues. Just as Dr MacDonald said in the House of Commons, if there are areas where all of the parties are agreed and satisfied that we move forward, then you start to implement and you legislate. and we work on the other issues, and this is what Dr McDonald said, and that we work on the other issues that are outstanding to try and resolve those too. That's all I'm asking. Because if you don't do it now, let's be clear, you can hide behind Haass as much as you like, but in a month's time, 6 months' time, a year's time, you're going to have to come back to these matters. Far better to do it now when we've got a clear insight into each other's views on the issues concerned, and let us try and resolve the outstanding matters.
Chris Little.